Good morning, afternoon, evening. It's Wednesday, September 22nd, meeting of the Manufacturing Oversight Committee. Thank you to everyone for joining as always. Scott from the DY Foundation here, and I think we have quorum of the committee. So first thing on the agenda, I want to welcome Felipe officially as a new ROC member. So welcome to
Thanks,
Felipe officially. Excellent. Great to see this committee growing, active participation from the community. So I'm incredibly happy as sitting in the foundation seat, because the more decisions that are driven by the community, the better. So I'm really excited. This has been a really great example for future committees, and appreciate all the support from all of you here. So the next thing we have on this agenda. So we have I'm just going to put it high level as voting. Sophie, do you want to speak to this, or did you want me to talk to this one a little bit more? I know we talked a little bit between us as far as kind of moving from a unanimous to kind of basically super majorities and majorities, if we want to start to evolve the voting process here.
You can keep talking. I talked to Jeremy about it a little bit as well.
Okay, actually, Jeremy, as you know, given that you're do you want to kind of talk about this as your perspective?
Yeah, let me kind of, we'll talk about the exact proposal, and then maybe talk about one tweak I was thinking about making, and then maybe we can just sort of like vote it. So the idea is, as we get bigger, it's going to be harder and harder, we assume, to get consensus, and that's normal, right? We want more people on the committee, so we don't want things to get stalled to try to get consensus about something and taking forever. So it's totally natural that we move to a more majority system or super majority. I think that was the plan all along. We were just doing consensus because it was so small, and like majority would have been 2 out of 3. It just too crazy. So it seems totally natural to move to this. And then on top of this is the idea of us really trying to leverage being asynchronously voting, right? Not waiting for this monthly meeting to do votes, because that's too long. So the idea is that we would want to adopt the ability to do async stuff, which we already have, but really make it formal. And my little tweak on it is maybe the async votes should be consensus, full consensus. But in person is where we say, look, if something gets deferred to in person, then it's just simple majority. And then the reason being is if someone has an objection, we want them to raise it so everyone else can think about it in the async mode. So maybe it's something like there's a first poll, and if it doesn't pass by consensus, the person who has the objection raises their objection. Once everybody's heard that, then it can be a full majority vote. But just the idea, objections should be heard in async mode. And they're harder to hear in async mode. They're easy to hear in sync mode. That was my one thing, but I'm totally open to that. So again, the summary is just understanding we're going to try to move to majority voting instead of consensus.
So I guess the question, are we talking about just a 51% majority, or are we trying to do 2/3? I think that, for my feeling on, again, put this to the committee, is I think that I'd like to see more of a super majority for manufacturer approvals. It just, to me, feels like a much broader consensus rather than just kind of having a majority vote. It's significant impact to the network. We're having meaningful deliberation on a lot of these things. If 2/3 of the committee is approving it, I feel like we've gotten to a place that everybody's relatively comfortable, and we can do that within quorum. So yeah, and by the way, kind of backing up, like my vision has always been, we ultimately want to work towards having a formalized charter for this committee. I think it's great that we're kind of like working and iterating as we go, but for some of these things, like trying to develop like what will be standards and practices going forward, I think those things can certainly be subject to change. But yeah, I mean, at least for the approval of manufacturers, my vote, something 60%, 2/3. But I think that it should be some super majority for a manufacturer approval.
2/3 for me seems more the best approach.
Yeah, can you repeat that one more time, Felipe? What was the best approach? Majority?
2/3.
2/3. Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with 2/3. I guess I have just a question in general. How big do we expect the committee to be? And then Patrick and I were actually talking. I think we should have some plan, like, and what the composite of the committee is. Like, we need a mix of domain experts, industry experts, and community participants. But what's the right mix?
So
yeah, that
sorry.
goes longer term thing. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the things that like there's a number of things that have yet to be defined as far as like we also should have you know, terms. We need to have you know, elections and re-elections and how we think about holding those. So you know, there's a lot of stuff to kind of lay out and you know, put into place. So I don't think it's anything that we have to decide today, but I think that again, the more that we can do this stuff asynchronously and then have the actual discussion and debate in you know, live conversation, the better. So I'll put some more kind of thought to it. I have some stuff that I've been outlining around general governance frameworks, but you know, I think that I agree. If we want to set a committee limit, we don't want to all of a sudden have like a 50-person mock. It's not going to be productive. But also, you know, starting to look at the criteria of it's great that we've got community participation, but do we have the right cut of people that are coming at this from you know, radio compliance side, components, security from a blockchain perspective? I think, you know, we have is a great dynamic from a starting point, and I'm really happy about that, but like making sure that we continue to add and not over index on one versus another. So defining what
I would just, as part of that, just as it becomes more international, does it
Absolutely.
make sense to have representatives from, you know, major regions, countries so I guess you know, I think we should be seeking out people to help expand the committee. I'm a little bit uncertain who we should seek to, you know, who we want to be bringing in, right? So.
But I think maybe more importantly, is this uncertainty about how the committee is going to be composed affecting whether you feel supermajority or majority is worthwhile?
No, I mean,
okay.
I think supermajority, I'm fine. I think for right now, you know, again, if you look at other industry consortiums, you know, you start to end up with subcommittees and different, very focused groups. And so as we progress, we can get to that level. But right now, I think let's keep it simple, supermajority. But it was just a general question to, you know, to everyone and to Scott and Sophie, like, you know, is the vision to have the committee grow to 10 people in the next 6 months? And then what's the composite of those 10 people? And then are we missing experts? Like we had talked about trying to pull somebody in from like a test house, like somebody who does compliance testing for UL or FCC. That might be a good representative to have. Should we try to get somebody from Brazil or China or Africa, right? You know, it's just like, you know, a little bit of thought on what the composite of the committee should be.
Cool.
Yep, absolutely. So I think that I can take on some of this, but just I'm pretty stretched right now. Do you want, you know, just so you guys know, like I am going to start to look to make you know, announcement coming soon as far as growing the team over here, making more hires, and thinking about kind of what resources we urgently need as far as committee management, community management, and whatnot. But I think that as far as if we can all think, you know, if we can do this as a shared working document, but Brad, I think you touched on just about everything as far, and I put this in some of the notes as far as what's the right size, what are the domains of expertise, how we think about terms and elections, like what do we like want to specifically target the next, like call it like 6 months, as far as like, are we actively scouting for some specific, not just kind of like what are the domains we want to have in general, but like what's kind of like the gap right now. And I think that, again, like the test house, you know, FCC person is a great start on that for sure. So yeah, let's kind of just make it as an action item of like, I'll kick off a shared doc and we can kind of work on that and then appreciate everybody's input. Is that okay? Great. Okay, what do we have as our next, anything else on this topic as far as like, you know, committee structure? I feel like, did we all actually, let's kind of, so backing up, sorry, putting it to a vote right now, switching manufacturer approvals to a 2/3 majority.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Fine.
Fine with it.
And that's both async and sync.
Yes, and I think we, well, my feeling is I think we should optimize for, I would say, and then again, we want to come up with the right framework for this, optimizing for async so we can use this time most efficiently for like drilling into like the finer nuances on our discussions.
But on async, we could stay with consensus, at least for the first interaction, or as Jeremy was saying, to try to get any doubts, any questions, under discussion?
I'm okay. Yeah, I mean, I raised that. I just want to maybe just all have us remember that let's do try to group a little together, even on async. If anybody has an objection while vote's going on, please make certain to raise it, timely matter.
Yeah.
But I think I'm okay with it being super majority on the async as well.
Do you all think that 5 business days is enough time? I mean, okay, so we're going to have a
Yeah.
bunch of people coming through next week. Like Monday, I'm going to send out an email and be like, can you guys approve? How long do you think is reasonable to ask for?
I think we do it a little, I mean, is 3 days okay for everybody, or is that, you know, trying to make it more than 48 hours, but, you know, just kind of arbitrarily throwing out 3 days is a way to be a little bit efficient, but give everybody enough time to dig into details.
Yeah, 3 days works. Less than that, it's hard if because the agenda, if we are busy one day, it makes it harder. But 3 days, I think it's doable perfectly.
Three
I'm
business.
just getting it.
3 business days.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing that's a little bit different in async voting versus in-person voting is we haven't visited this, but the idea of a quorum. You know, async, there's never really a quorum. So we're just being clear here. In a sync meeting, do we adopt the concept of a quorum and it'd be 2/3 of the minimum quorum? And async it's got to be 2/3 of the entire group. We have to think carefully through this, what that means.
So you're
Yeah,
saying
Maybe the 3 day
live
solves
meeting-
that. I don't know.
In a live meeting, like 3 people don't
Do you
show up.
envisage if you envisage
Who's
trying
cutting
to get
Phil, like, yeah, you're
How-
Phil, if that's you, it's cutting out.
how do you envisage if there's like a problem?
I envision there's a problem, someone raises
Okay,
it,
is that
and
better?
you know, it's better.
Yeah, that's it. If there's a problem, yeah.
I mean, if
I
there's a
think
problem,
that-
someone should speak up. That's
I think, yeah, I think there needs to be consistent as far as like the 2/3, yeah, like that 2/3 majority should be the same whether it's sync or async. I feel like I'm worried about having a discrepancy. So if it's, you know,
yeah. I'm not meaning to go deep in the weeds. I just want to make it clear. You know, we're saying 2/3 of the whole group.
I think it should be consistently 2/3 of the entire committee, like just
Okay.
across the board.
And we're not that big anyway, so even if 1 or 2 people are not in the meeting, it should still be 2/3 of the whole group.
And I
Yeah,
think
and I
that
bring it up just because the number of days involved helps solve that issue of like
Yeah.
someone's not quite there today or whatever.
yeah, and
Make
I
that
think
long
that
enough, people can get around it.
if somebody can't make a meeting in person, that either they can submit a vote, you know, through Discord, or you know, I think this needs more work, but I think that it's okay to, like, if you're not able to join for a live meeting, you can share that through, you know, I think we have
Like a
enough
proxy
tools.
vote.
Yeah, I think we have enough tools to manage this.
Cool.
We're beyond a little bit of the traditional parliamentary procedure in some of these things. So thanks, technology. Okay, so I am recording this as we have a unanimous approval for 2/3 vote across the whole committee to approve new manufacturers, 3 business days for the open voting period. Is that accurate? Going once, going twice?
There might just be some things about what's a business day. Is it UTC? Is it US time? You know, let's just try to be aware of that. Try not to schedule it so it's like in a weekend for some part of the world.
Yep, I think we can further define that. And we'll, for the time being, we'll be a little bit more liberal with those things if somebody is, you know, reports an hour after a 3-day mark. But you know, I think we can refine it in time. But again, small enough committee that I think we can all work pretty collaboratively on that. But we'll put more definition around it.
Good.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody. Anything else on voting? Our path towards a formalized charter, anything that we want to discuss there? Nope. Wonderful. Okay. Next thing on the agenda, this looks just more like an update of Coco. Oh, Coco,
Yeah.
you have a discussion on Maters running their own onboarding servers.
Yeah, do we want to talk
Go.
about now, or shall we finish some of the other stuff first?
Do you have the harder stop, Coco?
It's not urgent. So
just
we can
scheduled it
talk
in.
about it afterwards.
Yeah, I just scheduled it, Coco, so that we would it would actually get talked about and so that you could plan. So.
Yeah, I think we have this meeting for an hour and a half, so I just need about 15 minutes at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Or you can go right now if you want to do it.
Totally fine right now.
All right, sure. Cool. So right now the onboarding server we know is very centralized. It's controlled by DY, but really it's controlled by Helium. We have access to handout maker keys. Each individual maker has their own API access, so they can only upload to their maker number, and they can only see the rows in the database of their own hotspots that they've added. So because it is a point of centralization, we thought that it might be worth it to consider having each maker fork the onboarding server and instantiate their own instance of the database that they fully control and they upload to. The reasons for this, aside from the centralization thing, is that if there's any kind of errors coming back from the onboarding server, they typically ask us to answer questions, and that's not kind of good at all. We think they should be able to own the full process. And this also speaks to our new direction of asking makers to create their own maker onboarding app. If they do this, they're able to contact and talk to their own instance of the onboarding server, and they don't have to deal with any integration on the old one. So that's kind of where we want to veer towards, sort of have each maker kind of own their entire stack: hotspot manufacturing, customer experience, customer support, the app, the onboarding server, stand up their own ETL, stand up their own router for discovery mode, that type of thing. So that's kind of the direction that we're ushering all of them towards. And onboarding server is a part of it. So I think it might be worth exploring that a little bit more in addition to the maker app requirements.
Yeah, from the technical side of this, I don't really know if there's much the mock really has to be involved. It's not, we're not changing any security models or anything. The hotspots are still onboarded via the maker keys, which they theoretically own, even if they are currently proxied to Helium.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I think at this, if we do give them the onboarding server access, it would be even more hands-off in that I don't have to create any accounts for them. They have their maker apps. I don't have to approve any PRs. So that kind of just removes Helium from the equation as well and give them some more autonomy to do what they need to do instead of pinging us all the time. Us and Sophie, I guess.
So what's the engineering effort for a manufacturer to bring up the server? Is it pretty low? What's your side? And I'm asking because I feel like some of the manufacturers coming in, like I kind of question maybe the depth of their engineering capability.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. Like standing up an onboarding server itself shouldn't be too hard, but if they're unable to do that, then there's bigger questions at hand, right? Like they can't just ship a LoRaWAN gateway and be good with it. That's why we need to raise the bar a little bit more, and probably the reason why Abai asked to bring it up to the MOC is because now we are requiring more from these manufacturers to make sure that they know exactly it's kind of like a test to see that they are capable of this.
I like that aspect of it, but to Jeremy's point, I do think this is germane to the committee because I think it becomes almost a requirement. And is it a pre-requirement? At some point, how far do you get to go in the process before you prove that you can bring up your onboarding server and make it work?
Yeah,
to be clear,
I think it's kind of a requirement for approval. It's just sort of like, you also need to do this.
Yeah, I'm understanding a bit more. It does affect the manufacturers, and so therefore it kind of affects us. Before I was just saying this doesn't affect us. So go ahead, Felipe.
So is there documentations? I'm sorry, I'll ask and then I'll be quiet. So is there technical documentation on what's entitled in required here that you can share with us so we can just look at?
Not yet. Well, we will make that documentation available once it sounds like you guys are mostly on board with kind of moving towards this direction. So our next step is to generate some documentation so that we understand kind of the scope of what this means. Just like what we did with the maker app, we already have SDK, we already have the example app, we have documentation already. So it becomes a lot easier for a potential maker to digest and understand how much work is needed of them. before going down the path of getting an official approval.
Sophie?
Finally found the raise hand feature. Something else we have been talking about, or individually people have been talking about in Discord, is adding something to the approval process that has to do with onboarding, so that the makers have to actually prove that they can access the blockchain and so on. Because I'm deep in it with a lot of the makers, and I'll get through a whole audit and I suspect that they really don't know. Or even maybe they don't understand the importance of the security. That's more specific. And I would say that's actually true for a lot of them.
Yeah, I agree that what's going to have to happen if this goes through, and it likely is, the HIP-19 sign-up process is going to have to be a step in there, like, hey, nominate what your server is, show us that it works. And that's sort of the requirement side of it. But after that, we'll probably see, is what I predict, and this has happened already. Some makers may join forces and say, hey, can we pool our resources? Or, I'm going to pay you to be my onboarding server. We've already seen that with Linksdot and Syncrobit, for example. I believe they're actually using the same firmware. Linksdot is using Syncrobit's firmware. So that's another thing we should consider that might happen, when we let them have free roam to designate the servers. But I think it does impact the HIP-19.
Well, and Jeremy, I totally see that too. So the question is, can you have a third party run the server for you? Or can you use somebody else's server? Right. And so I think those things need to be thought through, because I think some of the people trying to enter the market won't want to do this, and they want to build the hardware, but they won't want to do this part of it.
Yeah, but if they don't have the engineering to build this part, doesn't give us much.
So this is why the committee, I think, needs to weigh in on this. Is this a test, like a threshold, like to Coco's point of having
minimum requirements?
Yeah, or do we let people share? Like, again, can somebody use somebody else's onboarding server as long as they're both approved?
I'm very much leaning towards let them figure it out. We put the requirement out there. They will, hopefully through the market, figure out what works. Some of them
Free market will decide.
Yeah, they can even share support channels. They can share. They can, as long as they share the responsibility, it's on their side. They can do it their own or subcontract from another vendor, but it's still under their responsibility to be able to either do it or get support that makes it done.
Right, and I think we can phrase this as, I think, Nick, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it's being used as a test, which sounds like a really good use of it, is that maybe you make them stand it up just to make sure they can, and then within 6 months they can use something else. I don't know if that's technically feasible, but just thinking about it from the perspective of Brad, like, this should be a test that I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying, Brad, but this should be a test that a manufacturer has to pass before they can enter into the market.
So what I was going to say is, if we really look at what would happen if we adopt this resolution, is all that's really going to happen is that Helium's going to say, look, we're not supporting an onboarding server for you. You will have to figure it out. That would be the basic message. And then we, being responsible, would have to help them figure out what that means. But as far as I'm concerned, I think this really just looks Helium saying they're shutting down this free service for manufacturers because it's too much to manage.
Well, I think the decentralization is the bigger point here.
Right.
But they can already do that now.
I think it's really critical that Helium truly can say they're decentralized, and this is clearly not decentralized. So that's the real motive in my mind to make this change.
There's a point of failure when people mention me and only me when things go wrong, and I think that's kind of our litmus test: is do people mention me, and if they do, then we're centralized for that particular component.
Is there any dangers from this? For example, if a maker takes on loads of orders and are getting swamped, and they're basically unable to fulfill this role, and it starts falling down, is that a danger?
Absolutely. There's another danger where their server could get hacked and people could onboard hotspots through their maker key that are completely leaked. So yeah.
I think that's the bigger concern, Jeremy, right? Like, there has to be integrity on this onboarding server, right? Because like you said, if they lose control, then lots of devices could get added. And I think we've talked about there's no way to take a device out after it's been added, right, easily. So I think there has to be some pretty, good thought put into this and make sure that is there a security audit required on their stand-up of the server?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with saying, look, there's going to be your responsibility, and we will continually, whatever that is, on occasion audit, or we're not promising a schedule, but if we receive word or credible evidence that you've been exploited, we might take the unusual step of revoking your maker key for the time being, so that the blockchain doesn't recognize it, or something like that. Something we should consider, when we hand this out. That is a danger I am worried about.
Yeah, I think that it's the next step beyond that of if an onboarding server is compromised and if a maker's hacked, it's not just troubleshooting the maker, it's getting into the fact of, do we now need to censor hotspots that were asserted that shouldn't have been, that were like expressly used for cheating. It's a big question, it's a slippery slope, and the censorship part, now we're back at the same kind of like centralization concerns. So
I have some thoughts around that. So in terms of preventing future gamed gateways to be onboarded from that maker, there's a chain variable that we can update, and that is on chain. So that'll prevent any future hotspots from being onboarded to a compromised maker, but it wouldn't change what to do with the existing hotspots already on the chain. And I think this brings up, one of the hips where validators kind of agree on a deny list, and maybe that's something we can explore.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That is a technical mechanism that would be controlled. And when I said revoking a maker key, I meant exactly pulling their maker key out of the chain variable of allowed staking keys. That would be the consequence, how we would manage stopping onboarding. And if we needed to go the extreme route of recommending the censure of hotspots, we would have to get validators involved.
One other thing to think of, and this is just the worst case scenario, maybe this is going down the rabbit hole, but let's imagine that there's a significant financial incentive for someone to do this, and that it just happened, right? That we just heard that some maker got hacked and all this, although kind of your worst fears are realized, like what will we wish we would have done at this meeting to be prepared for that moment? Because there's so much money on the table that it's pretty likely to happen at some point.
Well, I think the validator solution has to be applied, right? Because right now there's no way to take them back after they're on. You can stop them, but how fast could you add 10,000 devices, right?
Pretty quickly, right? If there's no rate limiting on the onboarding server that they stand up.
Yeah.
Yeah, validators would be the only way to blacklist the other devices.
And it just occurred to me, one of the security features that we've been enforcing through Helium is the fact that the onboarding key, this is getting very technical, the onboarding token that you use has to match the token that the public key of the hotspot. And we enforce that in the Helium server. And if we hand this off to manufacturers, they're under no restriction. They could remove that enforcement. And it kind of undoes one of the things that we're trying to get them all to agree, is that key has only ever been in the hardware that they manufacture and has never lived anywhere else, has not been pulled out. Yeah. That's another thing I just realized.
So Jeremy, does the microchip special Helium part help this at all?
It certainly does, but to make it effective, we'd have to make it mandatory, which I'm not comfortable doing.
Not yet, but maybe in the future that is something that needs to be considered if it helps this happen.
Yeah, it's just illustrating a point of trust we are giving manufacturers, and it's making even more so when we give them this. So.
Yeah.
I think given that already hand a lot of once we approve manufacturers that they're in and they're working away and beavering away, it is a bit worrying that I think, you've really got to think about the worst case scenario. And before, some of the manufacturers that we see coming through, you would worry a little bit that they've got potentially a lot more responsibility for this. And I think it really does take a lot of thinking about how much access are they going to be granted once they're approved, and what are the mechanisms? Because at the moment, there's no real mechanism for unapproving them, as we've already seen.
I'm seeing it as it's kind of a bigger issue. I'm wondering if we can adopt to say, go ahead, Helium, start this process. I'm already envisioning that there might be multiple levels of manufacturer confidence. Like you can apply as a manufacturer under scheme 1, in which case you have to send the keys you're going to use, and we have to do some sort of signature thing at DY, and then put them into your server. And if you're this lower level tier of manufacturer, you're not quite trusted. You're trusted enough to run your own server, but you can't onboard anything. You can only onboard things you've pre-communicated to us. And at the higher level, you've gone through enough auditing that we believe that you will run this onboarding server correctly, and we're okay with you both inserting records on your own and signing the transactions. But I don't want that to be in the way of. I think that can be done later. I think the engineering that Helium wants to do can be done and communicated to the manufacturers on this point. And then we can kind of defer like the scary parts before really turning it on, thinking about what we need to do.
Coco, what's the timeline on, I know that we've already had conversations about like having each maker running their own application, their own mobile app. But as far as like having makers fork the onboarding server, when do we want to try to get this out by? Or what was the discussion at Helium?
Yeah, so I think we can time it with the Maker app and sort of bundle that together. I think the documentation on how to set up best practices for how to set up an onboarding server is fairly easy to do. The access that they have is really no different than the access today. It's just, now they own the entire stack. And the timelines for the Maker app is probably, so I've already told 3 makers, I'm going to probably put together some documentation that maybe can come from DY in sort of an official announcement. But so far the feedback has been really positive. Everyone's really excited to own their own experience. And in fact, a lot of makers have been considering building their own app. So this transition, I'm hoping to sort of relay the information over the next couple of weeks. We can start giving them a month or 2 to develop their own app, really just scanning the example app that we have, and then start turning off features in the Helium app that is maker specific. And so we're probably looking at officially Q1 2022 to have new maker apps and new onboarding servers to go with that.
Be the non-technical question, but can we make these manufacturers stake some amount if they want to run their own onboarding server? So it's like, hey, if you guys screw up, then you're going to lose whatever it is, X amount of HNT. So that there's
a great idea.
We've been talking about that, the idea of including like slashing for makers potentially if there some criteria that's not being followed. I'm a fan of it.
So I'm going to bring this back to, I think, maybe a decoupling of who runs your onboarding server from an OEM. And I'm specifically thinking of some of the traditional communication OEMs entering, which is great. We want them. But, I think those companies will maybe not enter if there was the staking requirement, this onboarding server requirement. But if somebody would do that for them as a service, then I think then they'd be open to entering again. So I guess it's a question coming back to, I don't, maybe we don't dictate how they do it, but Helium just says we're not going to do it, and you have to go find a solution. This actually creates an opportunity in the market for a company to stand up an onboarding server, right? Stake the HNT needed to provide insurance to it, but then offer it as a service to OEMs who don't want to do that. And it's that company then that kind of becomes the one to verify the integrity of their onboarding server and their process.
The proposal as it stands will allow for that. There's just nothing in here that will prevent that.
No, I'm just thinking that might be how the market evolves, right?
Could you make it optional so that Helium will run the server if you don't want to stake, but if you do want to run your own, you have to stake, or some company has to stake. So there's because I think, Brad, one of the things I see with what you're saying is it's super good, but that could be just one company runs everything and they stake.
Well, you hope there's competition, just like the validators. You hope people will enter with competition.
got it. I would,
I think-
so I'm thinking of this from like a centralization piece. Like, how do you make it so it is decentralized so that there's at least one other player, which would be Helium in this?
Well,
Maybe-
I think some of the bigger OEMs or some of the very Helium motivated OEMs will definitely do it themselves.
Cool.
But,
It will be
but I
automatic.
could see where an independent company or maybe an OEM who does it for themselves then offers it as a service to other smaller OEMs or partner OEMs like Syncrobit you guys mentioned. I don't personally. I don't have a problem with that. The one thing I'm concerned about is I don't want to block high quality telecommunication companies from entering the market. And I think having a bunch of requirements around staking and crypto, like a lot of those companies, like they're publicly traded, like they won't touch it, right? But they're happy to bring the product in, right? So let's not restrict them from and letting the market find a solution that works for them.
Yeah, I agree. Is Helium open to running a service and they say what the rate is? We're not going to say be free, but if you guys had an option that people would go to first if they're just panicked, and you set the rate, would you think Helium be open to doing that, like as a service that people pay for?
Well, Helium as a company would not facilitate this, but we would not be opposed to others doing this as a service, just like Validators is a service that is provided on the network.
Okay.
And technically, DY owns the onboarding server.
Right. But
right. We're just saying it'd be great to have a good example of a third-party service, and it just happens to be Helium. But it's not the only one you have to run.
But this is where
I'm just worried that Helium becomes a de facto, organization that is sort of the thing that
still comes back to being centralized again, and people see it that way.
I do think that if we have circumstances, sorry, I believe it just going to quickly chime in on this, is that the idea of letting an open market decide this, where if there are manufacturers who have the technical capability and are comfortable with crypto to do the entire thing, like great, all the power to them. They can stand up and they're competing on service. If again, like to the other point that I think both Jeremy and Brett, like we've talked about, of we don't want to block these large enterprise wide, not as comfortable with crypto because they're publicly traded companies, that if we can have service providers and like if somebody takes advantage of that, coming to market first on it, and they're the only player for a period of time, then kudos to them for jumping on that first. I think that we kind of have to let that just be, an open market solution. So that's kind of what I lean towards.
Yeah, and the same way we have validator pools, we might have an onboarding server pool that several makers use the same and pay for the service. It's market.
I think it's just like validators, right? And then if you want to put a stake
pools
on it, then it gives you insurance to some degree that they're going to act with integrity.
I think we just have to. Sorry, Jeremy.
No, go ahead.
I was saying we just have to figure out, we have time until then, but how we will define the staking. So if you are running an onboarding server just for your fleet, X staking, if you're doing for a service, Y, Z, whatever, but that we can decide in the meanwhile. But I believe this should be open and people should be able to provide the service and let the market decide.
Yeah.
So if I can help, just looking at that, we're 45 minutes past the hour. I feel like, again, correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be like a general sentiment. I'm not going to say consensus, but I'm going to say there's a sentiment of that, like we're open to this as an open market solution. We want to start this process of having makers running an entire stack, whether it's themselves or through another provider. But any other things that we feel like are significant objections or anything that we need to, like to me, I don't think that the mock needs to be a gatekeeper in this process. I think we're gonna let it proceed and kind of we'll see how things go. But
yeah, my idea is just simply we adopt a resolution saying we're okay with this, and you can communicate this to the manufacturers that this is the general direction and that they should start working on this. But just to say there might be some final details at the end about whether they're staking something that we reserve the right to do that later. But in the interest of time, if we can adopt a resolution just here and now, say yes or no. We're okay with this or not okay with it, but that we will need more details later. Is that okay? As the vote?
Can I just, I was just thinking, even telecoms community and the telecoms companies, when they can produce their units and whatever, but they all then get a license. I wonder if we, this would be some kind of consideration that once a maker's approved and passes the MOC, perhaps they should then get a license, and that license can be revoked. And I was just thinking, maybe that second part of security would come in then. Maybe that would need a hip. I don't know.
I think we generally support that idea, Phil. It's we just want to make it more blockchainy, and that's where the staking might come in.
Yeah.
It does the same role. Your license is essentially you putting in money that you could possibly lose. It's almost even like an insurance policy,
which can either be done directly by the manufacturer or through another provider who's willing to take that risk for a cost.
I love it. Free market.
Yep.
Free market.
All right. Anything else on? So sorry, Jeremy had been put forth the resolution that the MOC is okay with the change, reserve the right to add criteria later to, providers such as staking, well, anybody as far as staking requirements. Any objections? Okay, seems like we have a resolution there. Anything else on this topic, Coco? Thank you for bringing this to the committee's attention. Anything else on this one?
Nope, we're good.
Wonderful. What do we have next on the agenda here?
Do we have Lewis here?
Yeah.
Lewis is busy. I'm happy to relay messages and DMs to him.
So what's the question? Like, I brought up the LoRa Alliance regional parameter spec, and I'll share it if you guys want. There's 2 frequency bands for China. One, to my knowledge, and Patrick, you can weigh in if you want. But this is going back from my past life. There's a 779 band and the 470. Patrick, my understanding was China was mainly moving to the 470 band, and that they're trying to restrict access in the CN 779 band. In fact, I think the LoRa Alliance was planning to deprecate the CN 779 band. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that sounds correct.
Yeah, this is it right here. CN 79 band devices may not be produced, imported, or installed after this year.
First of this year.
It's already deprecated.
Yeah.
So from a LoRa WAN perspective, this is the band.
Yeah, the big question to me is, why is this a question? I mean, did the committee, the channel committee have a problem?
It came up last time and I just left it here. And since there's a LoRa WAN committee, so it's just a question.
I see. Well, my gut take is that, this is up to the committee to do. It's kind of outside our purview. I'm okay handing it over to them, or if it really has to be like we approve their decision or something, I guess I can handle that. But it does seem like they're centralized into this. I thought it was the 470 band. I didn't even realize there was another band. And DOI is now a member of the LoRa Alliance. And so, again, some other part of DOI might really be able to resolve this.
Yeah, I don't think there's a controversy, but I think it's the 470 band. But
cool, we can move on. There's another frequency question. The RCM certificate, is it or is it not on the customer to apply during using the test report?
I have to go look at what an RCM is.
Oh, it's Australia. Yeah. And maybe that's out of the scope of this meeting. I just
I don't know.
Okay, let's move on. It's not really a part of this meeting anyway.
Okay. So it looks like there's I see a decisions section. Sophie, is this?
This is really belongs in the one above. This is the Brazilian people, BR. and Anatel. BR. is talking about Anatel, the government agency in Brazil, and has started a dialogue sort of around the community about whether or not we should be responsible for people buying something on one frequency and taking it to another country. And we talked about this in Discord. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. But I'm going to move this into status.
I don't see how the committee
we can't police that.
So Sophia, just to refresh, and because I remember talking about this, I think some manufacturers have intelligence in their unit, so it auto picks the right LoRaWAN channel bands based on where it thinks it is. Other manufacturers didn't. Did we suggest that this is like something that we should recommend as a best practice, but we're not going to audit it?
Brad, it's just one other item regarding what BR.dot is addressing. Not only the frequency they are operating, and yes, you are right, some have the intelligence to automatically adjust and others don't, but also regarding the certifications for the country.
Well, so
that's their issue.
Yeah, right. So in my opinion on this would be like, if a manufacturer is, what do you say, promoting a unit to a country where they don't have certification, that would be a problem, right? We're not going to go police it, but if it comes up, we shouldn't endorse it. But we can't stop somebody from buying, a bunch of units intended for the Europe or the US and taking them to these other countries. There's no way to stop somebody from doing that.
Precisely.
So, I'm going to bring up two things here, just so everybody can understand technically what's going on, and it might resolve some of the issues you're worried about. One is there's been a change in the miner. The miner code actually asserts, it takes the asserted location and it looks up what the frequency plan should be, and it starts sending commands to the forwarder based on that plan. So the forwarder now needs to be in line with the miner decides, and that's a lot more stringent. Two, the proof of coverage algorithm will help tamper down on this. If you bring a miner and you're on the wrong frequency, for your area, you're just going to lose out on rewards. You're going to be broadcasting and not listening in the right spot. So I'm helping those two things should help us be a little less fearful of just saying, look, it's kind of out of our control, that we're okay not getting involved. There's plenty of controls on there that should push people to do the right thing. There's no advantage to doing it the wrong way. But licensing is the one possible thing. Like if you bring an AU 915 into the US, technically it'll operate in the same frequency bands, but you probably don't have SE type certification. That's where we could kind of argue and say that is our role, which we did say that you have to have the right type certification for your country, and whatever role we have in enforcing that, we should remember.
Right, but I think all we can do there, Jeremy, is just if we see a manufacturer blatantly doing this on their website, like they're promoting a unit into countries that they don't have certification for, we can basically notify them and say, stop doing this. But aside from that, like, you can't stop somebody from ordering a 915 unit and then reshipping it to Australia or vice versa, right? Like, I don't think we can police this, aside from if somebody highlights a flagrant, violation or misrepresentation that's happening, then take action.
Yeah, and I think it's important we understand where this came from, particularly from BR.dot. And before there were any vendors actually shipping out in AU 915, lots of people from Brazil started buying US 915 devices and setting them up in some of the major cities. And all the rest of the people were waiting to get the right frequency available. And when they saw a couple hundred units starting to pop up, these generated a lot of issues. So I think this comes more from people actually buying and then shipping, and we have no way to control or police that. As Jeremy said, the blockchain itself will already help with the frequency. They will lose out. It will be incentivized, I think, for the future. But there's no way to police if a person buys and then travels and then takes it with them.
Yeah. The only way we can police it is to tell the manufacturer, look, you're in danger of us, again, pulling your key out of the ability to onboard new hotspots. That's our control point currently. Whether we think that's ethical or not, we could debate that, but I agree. There's one more tiny thing I just want to make certain we all understand. The blockchain will ensure that everyone joins together. It actually won't ensure that everyone's using the correct one for their band. Like if a majority starts saying, look, in Brazil, we're going to use US 915, the blockchain will be happy with it as long as the majority are over there. So we should also be aware that that's kind of the amoeba it will form. It won't actually technically enforce the country code, but the majority.
Right. Well, you can see areas where there's a mix. There are two sets of gateways talking at different frequencies in the same locations. So there's a set that talks to each other and another set that talks to each other. Okay.
But overall, I'm comfortable saying, yeah, we can't enforce this for now, unless someone comes back and says, no, really, if we think you can or should, then we have to revisit it.
Okay, thank you. So decisions. maybe we can move through some of these pretty fast. We get in from vendors indoor and outdoor units. Before we get started, fees are not in scope of this meeting, so we don't need to talk about that. But we get indoor and outdoor, and we also have a question from, I think it's Smart Mimic, who rebranded, and there's somebody else who, I think Rack Wireless is also rebranding their case. So it's if the outside is different, but the inside is the same, how do we want to handle hardware audits?
I think we handle it like FCC.
No, that'd be horrible.
What do you
Well,
mean?
isn't the FCC super strict? You change
No.
a sticker or something, you got to recertify.
No.
No, you can change the housing, but
They have a list of permissive changes that you can make, and you don't have to do anything. I mean, it's only if you change the layout or the enclosure, the mechanicals of the enclosure, then you have to recertify. But if you want to put a different label on it, you're fine, right?
Okay, so that handles radio, but again, our audit is also performance based, so we might be slightly, more concerned.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's exactly the same, but I'm saying generally, from my perspective, is like, unless the manufacturer is changing the PCB, changing the antenna, or making some major change to the enclosure, I don't think we have to. I don't think we have to re-audit the units.
And here's my take.
That's what
my take is that I'm okay letting the auditor kind of use their best judgment. Our auditors right now are pretty top notch. That is Lewis and Sophie. So if they make a recommendation to us in the audit, they say, look, I did the test this way because I think it's substantially the same. We can all just say yay or no. Although I'd hate it for it to be no, and then you suddenly have to re-audit it, which causes time. But I want something kind of like that. That's my idea.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Jeremy on that. I think at the end of the day, I don't do the audit. So how much work actually goes in when you get two that are essentially the same? I mean, if you're doing the full work again, then they should have to pay something, I would imagine.
Yeah, fees are out of scope here. Let's not, I don't want to complicate things with that.
Sure, but I just want to make sure, like, we adopt something crazy, it ends up impacting the manufacturer because, like, they didn't think they needed an audit, or they paid for an audit, we didn't do the full thing, then we figured out we messed up and didn't do the audit correctly. Who has to pay for the second pass?
Correct.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yep. So right now, we only, if we get an indoor and an outdoor at the same time, we just audit the insides once and the outsides separately. That is to take pictures, make sure the antenna fits, that kind of thing on the outside. We don't do any weather testing, just to be clear. If they come in separately, we charge them separately, like, because there is time. So it's been basically, if you don't change the insides at all, that means no layout changes, no PCB changes, no anything on the inside is different. There, we don't open it up.
Cool. I'm okay adopting that as formally, that's.
I'm fine with that, but maybe can you state it the other way? So what level of change requires you to submit for a new audit? If you change the PCB layout, right? Or you make a major component change, i.e. you change from one Semtech radio chipset to another, one processor to another. Those things would trigger a change. Obviously, if you have to go file for new FCC IDs or CE IDs, then that's clearly you've been, if it triggers a change there, then you have to resubmit. But like, for example, if I had a unit, let's say that I changed the memory from 2 gig to 4 gig, do they have to submit the 4 gig version for audit?
It depends on the processor. Like if you're swapping, it depends on the processor. So if they're going from a Raspberry Pi 3 to a Raspberry
No. The processor doesn't change. So same processor, it does Raspberry Pi, whatever,
yeah.
ARM quad core device. But let's say a manufacturer says, hey, and this has happened. Like I think Rack has 2 gig, 4 gig, and now 8 gig units out in the market. So they haven't.
I think SenseCap as well.
Yeah. So if you just increase the memory, you can't decrease the memory size. But if you increase the memory size, I don't think you have to submit for a change if that's all you've done.
Jeremy, you're on mute.
Thank you. And Zoom was reminding me. I'm comfortable saying, look, if you swap out the CPU, then we probably need to test that. If you increase the RAM, no, and an increase being the word. If you increase the storage, probably don't need to. If you decrease the RAM or storage or swap out the CPU, those are things we're pretty certain you're going to need to be re-audited for.
But in terms of labeling on the housing, I don't think you have to do it. I mean, you can have a blue one, a green one. I don't care what kind of labeling or logos or.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I don't really care about those.
Yeah, as long as it's just a visual aspect of the casing, I see no reason for auditing. If, for instance, they actually change the way the housing works, if it has a fan and they remove it, etc., then it might affect the performance of the device. But just labeling the outside appearance, I think there's no point in doing an audit again.
Right. And this is a little bit, so I think there was some dialogue in Discord about should we actually audit like the quality of an outdoor case or something like that, right? So that's out of scope. We're not saying we're actually going to verify your IP65 or whatever you say you are on your case. We're just gonna look at it, make sure it looks productionable, and say, okay, it looks like an outdoor case.
That's FCC does that part.
Well, FCC doesn't measure the quality of your case. FCC just makes sure that your case doesn't cause an RF emission problem, because the case will actually change the RF propagation characteristics of the electronics. So that's why the FCC will make you test with maybe an outdoor case and an indoor case, and maybe the different antennas. But nobody tests the integrity of the what you claim to be your IP67 or IP65 enclosure, except for maybe the manufacturer of the enclosure may have done some industry tests. But I don't think we should. That's outside of our scope of what we're trying to police.
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted us to have something that we all agree on.
So we should officially agree. What is it we're going to grant? The proposal is we don't care about case changes. It's really three things. If you change the CPU, you change the RAM in a decrementing way, or storage decrementing way. Those are automatic. Or radio. You change the radio. Okay, I'm going to write that in my little thing. Is everybody okay voting on that?
Yep.
And again, I'll say it one more time. If you change the CPU, you decrease the RAM, you decrease the storage, or you change the radio, you'll need a re-audit. Otherwise, if those four haven't changed, you're okay.
Well, hang on, layout. If you have a new layout,
PCB layout.
Okay.
Right. Then you have to get an audit. And then I would say if you recertified with FCC or CE or the regulatory body, then yeah, you need to resubmit, right? Because that means you made somewhat of a large change.
Okay. I'm going to say there's 5 things. If you change the CPU, if the RAM decreases, if the storage decreases, if you change the radio, or you change any parameter that requires regulatory recertification.
Bingo.
Did I miss anything? Okay, so.
What about if they're in a country like China doesn't have any regulatory?
Yeah, then that parameter, that thing gets struck off the change, and therefore any change is valid.
Sure China has no regulatory certification?
That's one of my issues with the countries that say they will only ship to China, because it's a personal opinion. Okay, I won't vote no for a vendor that says they will only ship to China so that they don't need any FCC or EU or any certification. But honestly, on my personal point, I would be more comfortable if we only authorize vendors that had some type of certification at all.
So Patrick, can you ping some of the Subtech China folks? I mean, I gotta believe that.
No, I have pinged Blaze in the past, and there is no requirement.
So here's what I do know. Bobcat did go for a voluntary certification. There is a certification you can go through in China. There's a government certification. It's just not mandatory. So one option is we could say, if your country has a regulatory body that does have voluntary certification, we could say that's now mandatory. That's an option. We should decide on it, but that's what I understand about China.
A mandatory, voluntary organization.
Definitely, because having absolutely no certificate. For me, having an FCC, a CE certification, whatever, it shields us from all the work they have to go through to prove that they are valid. And it makes me feel much more comfortable and shielded having that external organisms, having them go through the certification. Having absolutely no certification, just jumping into blockchain. But as I said, it's not technical, it's just the personal feeling it raises on me.
How many countries, is China the only one that doesn't? Because most of the other countries do have, my experience, and Patrick, please weigh in too. Like,
yeah, I just put something in the chat. So this was Blaze's reply. Blaze is our key LoRa applications engineer in China. So
I'm just kind of writing down notes. Someone should keep us talking.
Yeah, okay. I just also want to say we have 20 minutes left in this meeting, and we have a Codex thing that's pretty exciting to discuss. So maybe we could quickly move through this other stuff. Can I just go to the next thing? So it's a status. We have this Kilo 8 Dutch vendor taking pre-orders. The shop's been taken down, or there's no Helium references on the store anymore. So I don't think there's really anything we can do there now.
Yeah, I agree. Until they decide to apply, there's nothing we can technically do. We should strenuously warn them that these actions they're taking will affect them when they apply. And that may be that they should apply immediately so they can get on their 6-month punishment list, starting now.
Totally agree.
Does everyone understand exactly what was going on? They were taking pre-orders. They have taken pre-orders. They had the Helium logo on, or at least the word on it. They stopped to take the word Helium, but they really didn't seem to respect the idea that they should not be doing this. They really tried to play the angle of Helium is just a inert gas. So what do you tell? You can't tell us not to sell it. And, we can say it certainly is, but you don't get the right to have an onboarding key from us. So if you'd like to take that tack, that's how it could go. All right. So, but everyone agrees there's really nothing we can do right now. We could kind of adopt a resolution, say, hey, Ideatron, if you're looking at and watching this meeting, we're not impressed.
Yeah, for me, the only decision we can make, they will have to wait 6 months after they apply.
So how about this? We defer until they actually make their application, and then we use this as part of the discussion.
Can I just add a word on that? I think it was kind of disrespectful the way they reacted to Sophie in that chat, and I don't know if it was just bravado. And I know we discussed the 6-month thing, but the 6-month thing came out like quite a while back and quite early on the MOC process. I think for a vendor or maker becoming to market now and acting the way they did was a little bit. You think, well, 6 months, and I think some of these guys need to be warned that 6 months is kind of in place. However, it could be more depending on how how disrespectful you are regarding, using the Helium branding and blatantly, I mean, so he was ignoring Sophie and being a bit disrespectful. I thought when the chat when he said, "Oh, like you said, inert gas," he knew exactly what the discussion was because it'd been brought up previously. And I think, just to say 6 months and let's just move on. I think there needs to be a little bit of a warning in there that 6 months is general, but if behaviour warrants it, it could be longer, or it could be total that we won't be interested. We won't even be interested by them. So I just like it.
I certainly get the sentiment, and let me raise what I'm worried about. I want us to be super professional and just say, look, emotions really have nothing to do with it. And like disrespect comes down to an emotional level. And it gets kind of subjective, like when someone does something wrong and then we're saying, oh, and you called us names or whatever, and we're hurt by it. I don't feel it has any room in really how professional we act and how we do it. But the one way maybe we could swing that is that there's a certain amount of trust that we do give vendors, especially when we're talking about the onboarding server and the ability to add keys. And what we can say is officially this does erode our level of us trusting you for some of these really critical parameters. So that might be the area where we can remain more objective and not letting emotions get into it. That's what I have wrestled with. We do have a lot of power. We don't need to flex it and say you were disrespectful. We can say because you're disrespectful, that impacted another part that is really serious to us, which is our ability to trust you with these keys. So if we can word it that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what are we keeping rolling?
What's the decision here?
If they apply,
I'm proposing that.
in 6 months.
Yeah, I'm saying that there's no decision until they start their application.
Right.
But also another decision is, if possible, Sophie, can we task you to remind them once again about the 6 month thing? I don't know if they know about that.
Oh, they do.
It might be a courtesy. They do?
Oh, yeah, they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I think we've done everything we can so far. There's no decision need to be made. Does everybody else agree there's no decision?
Yeah, I said it, I believe, publicly in their channel so that everybody should know. Okay. All right, Smart Mimic rebranded. Sounds like we don't need to do anything else. That's an FYI. I don't actually know anything. They didn't even send the name. I think one of you told
Yeah,
me.
it's going to be Mimic with a Q at the end, but that's still confidential till I think tomorrow. They're either tomorrow or Friday. They're doing a press release.
Well, they better do soon because these recordings are public.
Yeah.
Yeah, Patrick. Be
Right.
careful.
Yeah.
Oops.
Okay, so voting, I don't think we should do that here on this call, but I have, from most of you, I have a vote, but not from everybody. I know that there was a concern about a couple of these, so maybe we could go through that. No major concerns. I mean, we have some concerns with, I think, Ruff and Broen to do with their pull request, that kind of stuff, like administrative stuff. We don't probably need to talk about that. I think, Jeremy, you might have had a concern about Rising HF. And we also have their 1 GB, that they're using a 1 GB of RAM. So they're out of spec, but the spec changed while they were in process because they managed to fail the audit like 3 times. So it took forever.
Can I ask a question too? Is it an RPi 3 or 4 in the Rising HF?
It's a 3.
Okay. And
Yeah.
is that currently out of spec too, or is that still in spec?
I believe it's out of spec.
So the memory.
I don't have the Raspberry. Say it again.
So both the memory and the processor are out of the current recommendation. Is that correct?
Depending on what model of Raspberry Pi 3 that they have, I don't have it here. It's Lewis did this audit. But
It
yeah,
might be the
very
compute module.
Yeah.
My opinion, well, let's see, let's try to go through them one at a time. I'll tell you about my Rising HF thing. I've withdrawn it. We've resolved what was going on. We thought that there was some like mixing of manufacturers applying under 2 different names, and we discovered that the one was actually the other. No, that was an unzip problem in the file. So I don't have any more objection with the Rising HF. Rising.
Oh, okay, good. So
and the memory and the processor is okay because it's grandfathered in. Is that the?
That's my second opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to understand. So that's fine.
We have a precedent there, so.
yes, Coco brought up that there's something, I think, Coco, you should say it because I don't actually know, something with Bobcat and 1 GB last week.
Yeah, so the Bobcats, which only have 1 GB of RAM because they comprised of 30% of the network, they were unable to do something. I don't remember the specifics of it, but basically took down the ability for those hotspots to sync into mine. And that is because they were using 1 GB of RAM. So Rising HF also using 1 GB of RAM would be a concern for me, depending on how much production they actually claim to be able to do. until light hotspots come around.
They
Coco, do you feel some of the changes that we're doing, like follow mode and other things, they're just still not
Follow
enough?
mode
even for
didn't
one
help Bobcat. So I'm not sure if it'll help Rising HF. And to me, if they failed audit like 3 times or whatever, to me, they seem a little, they may not be able to be quick enough to resolve issues as Bobcat was able to do engineering wise. So that would be my concern.
just one more thing to add here, which some of you or all of you have in your email. They right before this meeting, they say that they added 2 gigabytes of eMMC to simulate RAM, and they made some tests.
So they enabled swap? That's what,
So I think Lewis's kind of approach was, hey, if it was a processor we know, like an RPi 4, then I'm not going to go test and kind of measure its ability to keep up with the blockchain. But for processors he didn't know, he was going to actually go do that, right?
Right.
So I guess my question is, even though that Rising HF was grandfathered in, they've been taking so long to get to market, the requirements changed.
Mm-hmm.
Do we actually need to go do a test with their hardware to make sure it can keep up and isn't going to have a problem? I mean, ultimately, our responsibility is to make sure if a customer buys a product that we approve, it's going to work, at least to a minimum viable product perspective. And I am concerned if this processor memory limitation on Rising HF, if we think that there's a legitimate concern it won't perform, then we have to take that seriously.
yeah, I'm even more concerned that I like to phrase it in terms of if it's going to impact the blockchain or network, that's the bigger thing. It's like, hey, if we're going to have a day where, or a few days where 30% of the hotspots are just not performing at all, that does affect not even just the customer level, but the thing I think we're totally in charge of, which is the network.
So my question is, does it make sense to actually test the processing performance of this unit now, and do some assessment on if this eMMC memory swap thing that they're doing, if it really helps, or is it going to be a stinker, kind of out of the gate? Jeremy, I mean, I agree with you, the blockchain integrity too, but we have a responsibility to customers buying units. If we approve a unit and somebody buys a unit that's just released, it's one thing if like a year from now or 2 years from now, okay, it doesn't support the latest code revision or whatever, but this is a brand new unit somebody's gonna buy. We said it was okay, and it can't sync to the blockchain. That's a problem.
Yeah,
And also on the opposite side of this is not just the buyer experience, but the people with devices using the network. They see a hotspot in the area, they expect it to transmit their data packets, and they can't do that if it's consistently falling out of sync. Because
that's why I bring it up as
with 1 gig of RAM. Yeah,
a network issue. Yeah. Well, I think we can come up with something that works here, to kind of say, well, they're grandfathered, but because it's taken so long and because of the failures, they do really need an audit at that level. I just like us to codify it in a way that we're comfortable applies to everyone fairly.
Well, for me, it would be the 2 requirements. You can be grandfathered in, but your product still has to meet a minimum functioning performance level at the time of release. Right. So to the extent that they can augment the performance through code optimization, the swap thing, that's fine. But I just can't, at the time when they're submitting a unit for production release, we can't approve something that we know might not function or not have enough memory or
I think that's worthwhile. But the concern here is actually that this change in requirements, this upping, was a future proofing thing. So even the existing testing right now might pass. But it may not be sufficient in the future. That's the area I'm worried about is skipping. It sounds like they should definitely be audited. I mean, if we can swing the way of like saying, look, we need to audit, you can at least follow the blockchain now. And we really need to make certain that blockchain test is a severe one that replicates some of the bad days that we've had and make that a gold standard. I would feel a lot more comfortable.
And Coco, why doesn't follower mode work? Because I think that's what Curlink did with their units, which are kind of lower on the processing scale.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what the technical reasons are of why Bobcats weren't able to implement follow mode correctly. I think there's just something more to it that I'm not explaining or that I haven't read up on.
I can come up
But
with,
I
I
feel
think,
like-
a procedure that was happening. I think Bobcat was one, they were querying through Docker exec to ask the miner what its height is. That was a really stressful thing, and they're doing a lot. And then when it wasn't working well, they would kill it, remove the whole file system, and then like make it download a snapshot. And I think that they just exacerbated the way they were trying to fix the problem. But I am going off the rails here, so that may not be. But there's some sort of confluence of ways that they just didn't understand the way that Helium was doing on their hotspots. You know, how stressful it is that sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, and they just couldn't support it on their space, on their device to do this constant restart, fetch, delete. Okay, well, can somebody codify what exactly we're trying to decide here?
I think that what I'm hearing is that we would like them to do a blockchain performance test. I believe they're also the last vendor who is grandfathered in.
Okay, I'm comfortable saying we're grandfathered in, the process has taken long enough, and we have enough evidence. This is a really big issue. You guys need to, you know, pass the blockchain performance test, and there's a good chance they can, but if they have issues, they're just going to need to work, you know, with an engineering group to make certain they can, and then if they solve that, we're good.
Okay. Just alert.
But let's vote on that.
But as these guys haven't actually sold anything yet, I mean, how difficult is it for them to up it to 2 gig RAM? Is that such a huge concept for them?
They have a lot of money tied up into manufactured PCBs, probably with 1 gig of RAM, or they've bought 1 gig of RAM that's sitting on a reel that they're trying to go manufacture with. It's a big financial impact to ask them to go up the memory at this point.
Isn't the memory right on the Raspberry Pi itself? They're using an actual Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, so then they bought Raspberry Pis with this
Right.
memory on it that yeah, they'd have to go buy new Raspberry Pis, which are hard, you know, short supply
Yeah.
and expensive.
So pretty impactful, Phil.
Yeah,
If we
financially very impactful to them. So we need to be very conscious of that. Right?
Fair.
Just going on, you know, obviously what Coco said, you know, the future of the network is obviously being able to use the devices. So as the MOC, it's really difficult for us to approve something that we're not going to be 100% totally able to stand by, so it goes back to Jeremy, it certainly has to pass a performance test for me.
Good. I mean, maybe we should just really put it to a vote. Do they need to have a performance test? And is Sophie, is that all you're really kind of asking? You think that's what would solve it?
That's it.
Yep. Agree.
I vote that they need a performance test, and we can get into the reasons later if they really need the example. But so that's my vote.
Totally agree. 100%.
Scott, are you counting us? Do you have any objections?
I'm counting.
I vote for the performance test.
You're on mute. But
Patrick's on mute.
Sorry, me too. I vote for.
okay. So the rest of this, I think most of you have voted. I'll ping everybody who hasn't. We have Miles' site that everyone should take a look at. They went through yesterday. And Jeremy, do you want to talk about Codex? I put all the links in here.
We may have to have a separate, I'm saying, because we're going to come up on time in 3 minutes. And I have a hard stop, and I unfortunately have the recording. So if we want to do Codex, we may have to set up a separate chat for that, because I don't want to run over, and I think it's important to dig into it.
Oh, how do we handle that?
You can just make me or Jeremy the host.
Yeah, but I think I think you'll lose the recording.
Oh,
But either way, yeah, if you want to continue the conversation, just Sophie, you have audio, you're still taking the audio notes, correct?
I am taking audio notes. I'm just thinking maybe you can close this and we can jump back in. Oh wait, it doesn't matter, right?
I think the issue is that the video recording will stop.
Yeah, the
when
video
Scott
recording will
leaves.
stop either way. So.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
as long as there's copious notes on this from Otter about how we're discussing products, and we can append those to the overall meeting notes.
Yep, I have a hard stop at 5 of 5 or whatever, 5 of 2.
Okay.
How about we do this? We quickly try to get all of the votes for the pass, fail, or sorry, for approval or not, and then we'll
Yeah,
go
can we
into
go
the
through those?
products. Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
Just
So-
a note from my part regarding Panther and Rough, if we could include they do the voluntary mandatory certification, and because those two are from China and they have no certification.
We've never required that before.
Yeah, that's a tough change to do mid-process. We'd have to establish that and then do that going forward.
I think we should, we have to table that. If we were to vote on it right now, I'd say no. But it, we should consider it and publish it in advance, and we'll have a grandfather thing, of course.
Felipe, I want to encourage you to add that to next month's agenda.
Okay.
So do we, all right, so Rising HF, I'm just looking at the voting list here, Rising HF, there's a, we've got, the vote was for a blockchain performance test. Where are we with, sorry, so where do we land on Panther?
I think that's on the table. Is Panther approved? So quickly, they're only going to China. Sophie audited it. Lewis said it was cool. Initially had some ECC problems. All their ECC stuff has been resolved. Many manufacturers have had this problem. So it did pass, correct, Sophie?
It passed the audit. I'm looking right now to see if they did the other things. And I believe they did, yes. The other things being the test maker account and putting in a pull request.
I think
If there's something I'm missing.
I think Coco left.
Oh, okay.
If we need to move these to async votes, if we're missing information, we can also just,
think
Yeah.
was just trying to resolve what we could.
Okay, we're not missing information.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I said async that I was okay with Panther. Maybe that's one of the ones that wasn't in my email. Oh boy, I am starting to get heebie-jeebies about China only for many other reasons, but that's part of the Cotex thing.
Right. You know what? If we have reservations, we don't need to vote right now. I'm
That's true.
comfortable telling everyone we need the whole week.
Okay.
Or whatever it takes.
Yeah.
You
okay
were
passing it.
concerned about the 508 versus the 608.
Yes, I was. Let me explain that, everyone. I think in HIP 19 we say you have to have a 508 compliant ECC chip or equivalent. It turns out the 508 actually has a vulnerability in it. You can glitch it and get the swarm key out. It's a rather advanced thing, but it could probably be done with a laser workstation en masse. For that workstation costs like $20,000, and so a manufacturer could do it. There's some nefarious party could do it. Again, the result would be you'd pull the swarm key out, you would have an unbound hotspot miner that you could put in the cloud and fake. It just makes it a little bit easier to cheat. I feel a lot more confident if they really are using the 608 part, which is functionally equivalent, but actually Microchip has fixed this glitching flaw, which again is a fairly advanced middling problem with the chip. So, but I think it turns out they are using the 608. Is that correct?
That's correct. And they had previously provided a photo way before I asked them. So I believe
Okay, then my objection goes.
The 508s are EOL, so if anybody's using those now for new manufacturing, they have some old stock they found somewhere.
Exactly.
So
I'd be surprised if they had them, but it looked like they did, and that freaked me out.
Okay.
Okay. So Panther? Does anyone object? Let's go that way. Anyone say no, or is everyone yes?
Based on the guidelines we have today, there's no reason to object, is my view on this.
Yeah, that's true for me too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm okay with it. If there's a problem, we can take that.
The other three are, well, Miles' site, I don't think anyone's had a chance to look at yet.
Not
But
yet.
Rough and Broen both have some problem with, they haven't done their pull request or test maker account. So they're not ready to be voted on. Sorry.
Okay.
I would have thought they would have done that. The amount they were asking me to, get the audit done. But
And then you will send us the mile IoT?
Miles site is here in the meeting notes.
What is?
Mhm.
Yep.
Oh, it's in the meeting notes. Sorry, I was looking. at
Yes,
wrong
the Google
post.
Doc.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't mind
Right.
sending it too.
No,
Unfortunately-
I have it. I see it.
I have to hop. I'm gonna make Jeremy. I'll just make you the host, and you guys can continue deliberating. Okay.
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 Thank you.
Thanks,
everybody.
Scott.
Bye, Scott.